So let's get started, shall we? Voters certainly sent a message to the two main parties in this week's local elections. But what was that message? Both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have interpreted it as a call for them to get on with Brexit and redouble their efforts to reach a deal. But is that right? Well, joining us now from Leicester is the Shadow House Secretary, Jon Ashworth. Thank you very much for being on the programme this morning.
I'm delighted.
It feels like we should start with those local election results. You've been in opposition now for 9 years. The government is tearing itself apart on Brexit and, frankly, doing very little else. And yet you lost seats at the local elections. I mean, why isn't Labour doing better?
Well, we should be doing better, and I can't pretend I'm not disappointed that we've lost seats. But, I mean, it is worth emphasising. I mean, the Tories got absolutely monstered. I mean, the worst result for the Tories since... Yes, no, but I think it's important. I mean, this is the worst result for the Tories since, what, 1995. They've lost over 1,300 seats. When they were briefing, they'd only lose around 1,000, which was part of their expectations management. I mean, look, we should have done better. Of course we should. But we made gains in important marginal seats in the south, in Thanet, in Worthing. We've won councils back in Midlands marginals, like Amber Valley. So we did make progress, but of course there were other disappointing results across the country, and we have to reflect upon that. We have to understand why that's happened, and we have to work harder as a party to regain the trust of people so that we can form a government. But we have made progress in the sorts of marginal seats, particularly in the south, that will decide the next general election.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you're talking there about making progress in some seats in the south. But in Labour's traditional heartlands, in places like Bolsover, like Ashfield, like Bolton, like Walsall, you've been losing ground. It feels as if you're doing well with graduates, but perhaps losing touch with some of your more traditional support base. And you say that you are making progress in marginals, but actually, if you look at some of the analysis done by, for example, Professor Michael Thrasher in today's Sunday Times, the implication is actually you're further away from winning a general election because you're actually down on where you would have been at the last general election. So I just wonder, are you managing to find the right coalition of supporters here?
Well, I think Michael Thrasher's analysis in the Times actually shows Labour gaining seats, constituency seats, on what we have today, but not enough to form a government outright. So we do need to make further progress, but it does show us inching forward, if you like. And I just think that the situation is more complex, if I may say so, than the way in which it has been characterised in recent days. Yes, we've done badly in former coalfield seats in Nottinghamshire, like Ashfield, really badly. But next door in Mansfield, another Nottinghamshire coalfield seat, we've actually took the mayoralty, and that's a seat we have to win back off the Tories. And next door, in another Nottinghamshire coalfield seat, Gedling, we actually increased our result by our vote share by 8% and took seats off the Tories. So the picture is much more complicated. And here, you know, I'm stood here in outside my house in Leicester. In Leicester, we actually took 53 out of 54 council seats. So the picture is more complicated than some of the immediate knee-jerk reactions that we've seen on Twitter in recent days, if I may say so.
I can understand, of course, no one's arguing that there aren't areas of the country where Labour is making gains, but overall, I just still think that it is pretty astonishing that you're down 86 seats and control of 6 councils.
No, I mean, we are down, and I say that's disappointing. So we've got to look at the areas where we've not done very well. I mean, if we looked at these, if you did a direct read across to constituencies, which doesn't always read across. I've been doing these sorts of interviews for years now, and they don't always necessarily read across at subsequent general elections. But on these results, we would have lost Derby North, for example. But there are other seats we would have gained. But I don't want us to be losing constituencies anywhere. I want us to be gaining constituencies to form the next government. So we have to work harder to win the trust of the British people. We have to look, we have to, you know, we should be pleased that we've made progress in some southern marginals and Midlands marginals, but recognise that we've gone backwards in other marginals. We have to respond to that. But I would emphasise the Tories got absolutely monstered in this set of local government elections. There were worse results since the mid-90s, and there are lots of Tory MPs who, if these results were repeated in a general election, for example, in Plymouth and places like that, those Tory MPs that would lose their seats and Labour candidates would become Labour MPs in those marginal constituencies.
I mean, some people think Jeremy Corbyn is part of the problem here. Your colleague Lisa Nandy, who represents Wigan, just the kind of place that, of course, you need to win, said yesterday Jeremy came up on the doorstep a number of times negatively. Is he a help or a hindrance?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn's leadership allowed us to have that remarkable general election result in 2017. And by the way, in 2017, I was doing similar programmes to yours, Sophie, on election night and so on, in the around the 2016 local government elections, and we were being told, oh, what a terrible set of local government elections for Labour. And then, of course,
you didn't win the election, though, did you?
But we had some remarkable victories in seats that people didn't expect us to win in, and everyone told us at the start of that election campaign that we were going to get absolutely hammered. Look, I'm not complacent. I mean, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, oh, this is nothing to worry about, it's all fine. Not at all. I'm just trying to step back and recognise that we have made progress in marginal seats, particularly in the south, in places like Thanet, in Plymouth, and some of the Midlands marginals like Amber Valley. But we need to work harder, and we need to do more to win the trust of the British people. We need to be talking about the big issues that affect people's lives, like the future of the NHS,
let's talk about some of those.
The future of schools that are being cut back.
Let's talk about some of those big issues, shall we? Because it is clear that a message was sent by voters, and I'm interested to know what your interpretation of that message is. Jeremy Corbyn said after the results on Brexit, an arrangement has to be made, a deal has to be done. So is that the next steps, Labour trying to do a Brexit deal with the government?
Well, there's all kinds of different motivations for the way in which voters voted in these elections, and you can't always interpret them as just sentiment about Brexit. But on the issue of the deal, that we've seen a lot of speculation in the newspapers today, and I do think it's actually quite disappointing that it looks like Tory ministers and Tory spin doctors have been briefing about what's happening in the negotiations. We've entered these negotiations in good faith. They should be confidential at this stage, because if you want to get an agreement, we have to be able to respect the position of those sat around the table, and we seem to be reading all kinds of things in the newspapers today. So I would say to those Tories negotiating, this isn't really the best way to go about it, to be frank. But look, we've entered those negotiations in good faith. We said in our general election manifesto 2 years ago that we accept the referendum result, and that we believe the correct way to bring this desperately divided country back together is an arrangement where we'd have a permanent customs union deal with our ability to have a say over trade deals, a single market relationship, and guarantees about workers' rights. But the problem about the way in which the negotiations are going, and I'm not part of the negotiations, but as I understand it, although the government are trying to sort of redress up their customs union office, they haven't really shifted. And the key thing is the government want to be able to do their own trade deals. And my concern that is, if we have a trade deal with the United States, for example, that could mean Trump's America and big private healthcare corporations getting their hands on NHS contracts. I'm not prepared to countenance that. It's why we need instead a permanent and comprehensive customs union arrangement where we do our trade deals as part of the European Union, not a trade deal which allows the Americans to come in and buy various different NHS contracts. And I think that is a real problem if the Conservatives are prepared to go down that line. Our NHS mustn't be for sale to private healthcare companies in the US.
You talk about the government not being prepared to shift its position. So I'm just trying to work out if Labour is prepared to compromise on its red lines as well. I mean, is a second referendum, or if you prefer to call it a confirmatory vote on any deal, a red line for the Labour Party in these negotiations?
Well, a confirmatory vote has clearly got huge support amongst parliamentarians, Labour parliamentarians particularly. We've seen that in the newspapers today. It's got huge support amongst the party membership, and we've always said that if we cannot get a customs union arrangement, a customs union deal and a single market arrangement, if it looks like we're going to have a bad Tory deal, or indeed no deal, which will be disastrous for the British economy and people's jobs and livelihoods, then it should be put to the British people in a confirmatory vote. So we should put it back to the British people. So, look, but at the moment we are trying to negotiate in good faith a deal with the government which secures a permanent customs union which allows us to have a say in trade deals in the European Union, because we don't. As I say, there's a real danger that we could have a trade deal with, for example, the US, which puts the NHS up for sale, and I'm not prepared to countenance that.